the opinions.
No, that's not an opinion, it's a fact.
So, in the aftermath, I think, of what we can fairly describe as the controversial ending of Game of Thrones in Season 8, there's been a few defenses by the cast members, namely Sophie and Kit, but those weren't very well thought out. So, more recently, Carice Houghton, I think that's how you pronounce it. I actually know German, but Danish I don't know very well. So I'll say Houghton. So Houghton has recently spoken in favor of Season 8. I don't think she has much of a good argument, but at least she's trying to propose an argument where the other ones were just kind of the sniping or just, you know, very shallow defenses of Season 8. So let's go through it. So first up is, of course, the infamous Bran problem, right? That she says that, well, people just didn't like that Bran himself was chosen. Now, I think like most people, I didn't like the Bran decision, but I didn't like it because it was Bran. It was because there wasn't really much to the decision. I mean, if we go with the script and the dialogue, Tyrion tells us, well, Bran has a really good story, and that's why we're going to choose him. And, you know, on top of that, he obviously has powers, right? But that's a pretty fairly weak justification because, well, that could be true of so many other characters. I mean, for instance, Gendry also has a great story. I mean, right, he survived many, many misfortunes, and technically he has the bloodline, so he could be chosen as well, but we would have the same problems. Like, there's no real justification. It's just, he just chose a name out of nowhere, and we're supposed to go with it, but it doesn't really make any sense. And secondly, she defends the sheer randomness of the decision, right? They just picked the king, and that really, really appealed to her, and because it was just so out of nowhere. Well, again, it's a little bit unfortunate for her because Charles Dance recently kind of shot that down, saying that, you know, any longtime viewer would say, a committee with water bottles. That doesn't really make sense to what Game of Thrones was, and say that's how we're going to decide people. But also, if they're doing it by committee, that's completely the opposite of randomness, right? If it was random, it would be sort of just, wait, did the masses rise up and choose somebody? There was just this, you know, one person who decided? No, it was a committee. It was really pre-planned. So it's not random. So it doesn't really fit what even happened in the storyline. That may be her perception, but that's not actually what we saw. And then we get the infamous, well, it was unconventional, right? That people liked Game of Thrones when it was conventional good, but then it became unconventional good, and they had a problem with that. And that's what they had an issue with. Well, I have to say, I know a lot of people do have that hypothesis and attack it, and I don't even mind a lot of those commentaries. I just don't think they're correct. I mean, we do know what an unconventional story would have been, right? If Drogon suddenly talked and he took over as king, that would be genuinely unconventional because none of the dragons have acted like that. And that really, you know, you'd say it breaks the rules of the universe, but it would definitely be unexpected. But, you know, Bran being chosen is not unexpected. I mean, again, we knew probably one of the Starks was going to be chosen because, again, the stories were becoming so pro-Stark. We definitely knew probably one of the Starks would be chosen. We didn't know it would be him, right? I mean, some people even thought Arya was going to be chosen because, again, she has these powers, right? She's proven herself to be very adept in battle. She's already survived many wars and so on and so forth, right? She's been inducted into the Faceless Men, so she has a powerful ally. But here's the problem. It's like, yeah, we kind of knew it was going to be a Stark, but Bran was probably the last on the list because it was just so ridiculous. But it's not because it was unconventional. There was nothing unconventional. We definitely knew it was going to be a powerful member of one of the houses, right? Now, I myself would have thought Davos would have been logical, even though it doesn't belong to a powerful house, but we kind of knew the way they were doing it was becoming Lannisters versus Starks, so it wasn't very unconventional. We knew it was going to be some powerful player within Westeros, so it wasn't very unconventional, at least not in my eyes. And then we get the final, well, this was a deeper ending than we all suspected, because this was really, again, we didn't understand this, but it was a very deep commentary on politics today. Well, again, I don't know how much access Van Houten had to the actual scripts, because they pre-planned this a couple years ago, so this is not really a commentary on Trump or Hillary Clinton or the rise of fascism and or authoritarianism today. I mean, it could be, Certainly some of the jokes did reference the elections, but that could have been written very late into the game. But in terms of Daenerys being turned into this weird mishmash of Hitler, Castro, this weird revolutionary fascist, that was pre-planned years ago, right? George told them the story years ago, so it wasn't a commentary on politics today. This was pre-planned technically decades ago when George formulated the stories, right? It seems like it's going to be clear Daenerys is always going to turn to this kind of evil dictator. So it really wasn't a commentary on today's politics. Timeline doesn't fit. That's the empirical issue. Let's talk to the ethical issue, which is, well, whatever you think about it, at least it's trying to be a commentary on today's politics. But it's like, really? Well, what is exactly the political message? So Daenerys is wrong, fascism is wrong, but we get this kind of weird capitalist authoritarian regime with Bran at the head of it? I mean, is that the argument, that authoritarianism is better than fascism? Or an oligarchy choosing over democracy is better than a fascist choosing over democracy? It doesn't have a lot of coherence in terms of ethics. Maybe it's true that authoritarianism is better than fascism, but that's actually not always the case. Believe me, historically, in some cases, authoritarian regimes are even more murderous than fascist ones. You have to depends on the case. So it's not you're not home free by saying, well, it's not fascism. It could still be a lot worse alternative depending on the situation. And then there's a kind of minor point, which is she really is kind of revising radically what happened with Robert in the first season, saying, well, he didn't even want to rule, so it was better that we have Bran because at least Bran wants to rule and Robert didn't want to rule. Well, I think that's a pretty severe revisionism. It's true that Robert was pretty passive and perhaps indifferent. He obviously should have been much more active and he should have recognized that Cersei was a danger to him. But I never get any indication that he was suicidal or he didn't want to rule. I mean, he ordered Daenerys to be killed just to remain in power and to safeguard his throne. I mean, Ned and him have a major argument over it. So he could have been more active, and you can definitely see him as a tragic figure who didn't want all of what entailed in being king, but I never got a sense he never wanted to be king at all. I mean, maybe he didn't want all the duties that went with being a king, but I think, this retconning that, well, Robert didn't even want to be king, that doesn't hold up when we look at season 1 carefully. So, a lot of interesting defenses, but I don't think they really hold up to what actually we got at the end of the show, or even the early seasons. I mean, that's really the main criticism, right? It's incoherent onto itself. In other words, you don't have to care about the books. The final seasons don't make sense to the dialogue, to major scenes, to entire episodes that happened earlier. They literally contradict the writer's own words, the writer's own scripts. It doesn't make any sense. And though these are kind of interesting reinterpretations of the data, I don't see anything here that really plausibly goes to what fans were having issue with. It's an interesting perception from the inside, but I guess I could only say that performers, when they do certain scripts over and over again, get tired of them, and they like a kind of new, weird, fresh script, which is fine, but it could still be a really bad script. Alright, this has been GRRM Analyzed on the very bizarre new defenses of D&D in Season 8. Alright, GRRM and Thrones Analyzed. If you like the content, please hit the like button and or subscribe. Please comment below. Thanks for listening.